Welcome everybody to the topic tonight, which is UiPath apps, storage buckets, file picker control, and queues developer series. And if you want to go to the next slide, I'm Diana Gray. I'm the community marketing manager at UiPath. And tonight we have Pradeep and Andy on as well. They're both MVPs with the community. And this is the third session that they'll be going through on apps. If you go to the next slide. So these sessions are basically for the Americas, Latin America, and Canada. It's delivered by MVPs in these areas. And we encourage you guys to go ahead and network on the chat box. We've seen a couple of you before. So go ahead and get to know each other. We ask that you keep yourself on mute unless you have a question that you just need to ask, and then you can take yourself off mute and go ahead and do that. If you do have questions, you can put them in the Q&A or in chat. And if you have any topics that you would like us to cover in the future, if you'd please just put those or send those to me, diana.gray@uipath.com. That would be great. And if you want to go to the next slide. So do you want to go through the agenda, Pradeep, or?
Let me come back to it. Why don't you wrap up?
Okay, so this is the third part of the series. Last week will be the last night that we'll be doing this series. So that's October 25th, or next Monday at this, or next Tuesday at the same time. And if you go to the next slide. Yeah, the other thing I wanted to let you guys know about is that we do have a technology series coming up. This is the schedule. So if you go to the event community.uipath.com page, you'll see a series of events that we'll be running in October, November, and December. And these are great events. They're being done by the Tech Alliance series group here at UiPath. And then if you go to the next slide. The other thing I just want you to know is if you're interested in becoming an MVP with the UiPath community, the application process is open now. So, and it will be open till December 10th. So you can scan this barcode if you're interested, or again, I'll put my name in the chat box. And you can just reach out to me and I'll let you know more about it if you're interested. Okay, so with that, I'm going to turn it over to Pradeep to start the session.
All right, thank you, Diana. And welcome everyone. Very good afternoon. And thanks for joining us and spending your evening time with us discussing UiPath apps and some other features that we are going to talk about today. This is our session 3. For our 4-part series on UiPath apps and integrations. So without further ado, or let's do a quick introduction. I'm not sure if all of you have been part of these sessions all along. So myself, Pradeep Shukla, I'm a senior solutions architect, an automation architect, been part of UiPath for several years. I'm a UiPath MVP for 2022, and I'm really excited about different products and services that are part of the UiPath ecosystem, especially UiPath apps. And I have my co-host, Andy Menon, with me. Andy.
Hello, everybody. For those of you who do not know me, my name is Andy Menon. I am also a UiPath MVP and an integrations engineer and RPA SME. I'm also the founder of RPA Vanguard, the company, and I'm the host of RPA Vanguard channel. And Pradeep and I, along with another MVP, Priya, host the Automation Rocket Ship channel. And I'm very excited to have you folks join us today.
All right, thanks, Andy. So we have a lot of things to discuss today, okay? And I'm very excited because in first part, we discussed the very basics of UiPath, how UiPath apps, what does the screen looks like, how you can build a front end to the automation. And that's what the primary purpose of UiPath apps came out to be, that you can provide a face to your automation, right? So, and the integration is very seamless with different services available across the UiPath orchestrator and UiPath ecosystem. So we are going to talk about storage buckets. This is one of the features from UiPath orchestrator itself. As the name suggests, these are storage services. So we'll look into that. And the reason how the storage buckets can be used. So we will consume these storage bucket, the information in the storage bucket, how that interacts with UiPath apps. And that's where we will go a little bit deeper and we'll try to explore additional controls and components that will have integration with storage buckets, where we will try different things like uploading a file, downloading a file, and we'll look at different features, different properties of the file picker control itself. From there, we will move towards a little bit more advanced concepts where we look at the integration with queues. So if you have any experience with the UiPath system, you would have already looked at building queues, building automation with RE framework, or in general, consuming queues, creating transactions, processing those transaction items. So you would have some idea, but if not, we'll do a quick overview on queues, what queues are and what the purpose they solve, and how can we build an integration with the UiPath apps. So that's our agenda. We'll come back to these slides and we'll try to uh, wrap up within time. We'll spare some time for sure to have questions and answer any doubts that we may have. So let me move on to my orchestrator. All right, so that's my orchestrator tenant here. And so we talked about in our initial session, we talked about some basic applications that we built where we can take information, submit to data service and pull that data, look at it, how we can change style formats on the screen itself. In the second session, Andy went through in depth with different kind of validations, all the control validations, functions, events, rules. We really went deep. We took a very deep dive and understood in the minute differences and how we can really use the power of functions, rules, and events in our automation itself. So today, let's look at storage buckets. So we talked about storage buckets, right? So let's go here. And in case if you have not used storage buckets, we'll look at from with a fresh view. So we go to our orchestrator panel. It takes sometimes a few seconds to load up. So you can go all across here and you'll see a storage bucket here. So as the name suggests, it is a storage. So in case if you're using any other cloud services, if not, you'd understand how this works in general. So the purpose of having a storage bucket is rather than using your desktop storage or your file storage on your machine, UiPath came up with this concept of having a storage bucket, which is nothing but a cloud storage option, right? So you can have your files, your documents that you want to keep available in the orchestrator, so your automation can quickly access them, right? These are different from assets because assets were specifically targeted for a certain type of purpose. Storage buckets is a data repository where you can add any kind of content. So in order for today's demo, where we are trying to integrate UiPath file picker control with storage buckets, so what we are primarily doing, we are using storage buckets as our backend, okay? And my UiPath apps will be the front end from where I will be uploading a file, and then we will come back and check that gets uploaded in the storage bucket, and vice versa. We will be also have an option to download these files from storage bucket using UiPath apps, not directly through the orchestrator. So our users have a front end, a nice front end where they can work on it without bothering about what's going on behind the scene in the orchestrator itself. All right. So creating a storage bucket is pretty straightforward. You just go here and you can click a new storage buckets, or you can create a link from other folders. Both options are out there. So you can, so I have one storage bucket that I have created, which is primarily, it's a repository of resumes. So let's say this is an HR function, HR use case, where we are trying to upload the resumes in the storage bucket itself. So if I open it, it's pretty straightforward, very minimum information that you have to provide, because this is just the name and the type, and the way we can access the information with some features. So we provide a name of the bucket, we provide a description. We have few options like whether this storage bucket is read only. If we mark this read only, it means we cannot upload any data to it. We only upload data through directly when we are uploading data into it, but we cannot programmatically, we cannot add or remove content from it. Audit read access is primarily governance around the storage bucket, how we monitor who is accessing data, what type of data they are accessing, and what operations they are performing on that data. Then you have labels. This is primarily from search purposes. You can create labels here that can help you identify the storage bucket. If you have a lot of storage buckets for different purposes, you can look into that. So we are just keeping it very simple. Just put a data name and define a description, and that's it. Then you're all good to go. You can go back. So that creates my data repository here. Now, once the data repository is created, I can come back, I can just double click, open it up, and there I have an option to upload new file. What does that mean? I can upload different files, and later on, I'm going to use these files and be able to access them through UiPath apps. So upload process is also very straightforward. I don't think that we need to define it any further than that. You can just browse and point to the file that you want to upload here. All right. So let's move on to the apps segment and see how we integrate these storage bucket properties with our app. All right. So this is my app, the resume inventory app. It's pretty straightforward, where we are going to use few controls and see how we integrate with our storage bucket. So as we did in our first session and even in our second session, we looked at how we create our user interface using controls. So that's what we are going to do here. So we are using file picker control, just like that. You click on the add control, go to input. If you scroll down, you have to find the file pick. Okay, there you go. So that's the file picker control. So once we drop here, the file picker control, we'll look at some of these properties here. So when we look at the properties, we see there is, well, this is, yeah, so there is a value binding. Then we have maximum file size. So mind it, we are not controlling the size of the file at the storage bucket side, right? So we did not configure anything at the storage bucket level that what should be the size of individual file that can be stored here. But we are restricting the size of the file that we upload through the file picker control itself. So we can update this value here. We can also check at what type of files we want to upload. In this case, we are allowing docx and PDF file. Then you can put the label is just select a resume file to upload. So those are the primary properties. So, and other than that style part, we have already looked at. I believe if you have done some hands-on exercise on this after both of our sessions in previous weeks, you should be comfortable in terms of dragging and dropping these controls over here, playing with different alignments, label placement, font, color, or typeface, the way you want to change it. So that should not be alien to any of us at this stage. So now, once we have created this, now the question comes, how do we integrate the storage bucket? We just dropped a file picker control, right? We don't, but still we are in the apps, we don't have the storage bucket connection here. So for that, just like when we click on add control, we see all the different user controls that we can drag and drop. We have another option here, a small tiny drop down, which actually provides us a way to add additional objects like storage bucket, processes, entities, queues, connection. There are different other options. Now, since I have already added, I can show you, you can see this orchestrator segment here. That actually an indicator that there is some integration is already available. But when you're doing it for the first time, you would not have this object here. So that's where you would actually go point, open this drop down, and you go to storage bucket. And I can try it again. That's not restrictive of me. So now I can go and look for storage bucket. I'm going to my workspace here. This is sandbox is my orchestrator, tenant name. And when I come over here, I see data repository is the storage bucket, which is already selected here. And I can see the name and information on that. Now, mind it, it does not show the content here, right? It only shows the storage bucket, and that way I have built my connection. So once my storage bucket is available in apps, so that's the first stage. Now, the second stage is where I have to build a connectivity. All right, so let's come back to here. So what happens when we come over here? We have two properties here. So one, we have a download only checkbox. Can you see that it's down below on the screen? Let me move this. All right. So this is a download only checkbox. So this checkbox has a specific purpose. This is primarily for when we are trying to download a file through file picker. But otherwise, you can just leave it unchecked. That way you can upload these files here. All right, so this stage is done. So now I know that I can select. So I have a file control that can actually, I can use it to point and pick a file from a location when I'm trying to upload this file. So the next stage comes, how do we upload it? Because to be honest, we haven't done anything, right? We have a storage bucket reference in the apps, but there is no connection, active connection that we have built yet. So for that, we go to the uploads button and we look at the events. So let's look at this event. So what we have here in this event. So if you see here when you come, so this segment is upload file to storage bucket. So where does this come from, right? So usually when you create add new rule and you go there, you see this drop down box, right? So you have to go scroll down all the way down here. Hold on, sometimes it works pretty quick. All right, let's delete this, go back.
Alternately, they can just start typing something related to storage bucket, and those menu items will show up.
Yeah. So we see upload file to storage bucket and get file from storage bucket. So both these cases, we know that this is how we are going to link it. All right. So that's what this event is. So this button is nothing but it's an event, right? So what event we want this button to trigger? So we want it to trigger upload file to storage bucket, and then we point to the file picker. So what file we want to upload? We want to upload the file name that is being collected by the file picker control. So we go and we find out the file picker control. So that has the file name itself. Storage bucket, where are we going to upload this? We are going to upload it on the data repository storage bucket. Now, when we come down next, there is a checkbox as auto generate name. So if it has as the name suggests, right? So it generates a unique name. It generates a name for the file that is being uploaded. So what happens if I do not check this box? The file will get overwritten. If I'm trying to upload the same file multiple times, it will overwrite the content on your storage bucket. And you would not know that data is overwritten or updated. By default, file picker control or even the storage bucket control, storage bucket service itself does not prompt for that. So for now, we'll just use this auto generate name just to keep it simple. but there are ways we can build that validation before we are uploading this file. So we are aware of that if we are trying to overwrite a content on the storage bucket or not, right? So that way, if the name is always unique, we are good to go. We are not risking that uh, that we are going to overwrite some content that's already there. I think that's about it. I mean, those are the primary properties, and that itself actually establishes the connection. So let's close this and see this particular app in action. So I'm going to run the preview here. And you want to add anything else here?
It's a good thing you brought that up, Pradeep, the unique file thing. A couple of things I would like to add on that is one is if you have an option to save the file with a unique name, I would prefer that. My recommendation is, yeah, save it with a unique name, because it is possible that you can have the file with the same name, but the content might be entirely different, right? In terms of right, which means that you might think it's the file with the same name and has the same content, but it might not necessarily be true. The second point to what Pradeep was talking about is how do we validate whether a file is existing? What you can do is you can look for the file by using the other method that Pradeep just showed, is get file from storage bucket. If your file exists in the storage bucket, then you will get a URL to download it. And once you get the URL back successfully, you know that file exists, and then you can use that decision to decide whether you want to replace that file or you want to generate a new file name.
Right.
Yep.
No, very good points. So let's look at this. So we just have to click here, and there are other ways to do it, right? I don't have to click here. I can actually directly drag and drop to. So that works perfectly all right. Let's go find some sample. All right. That's another use case that I'm working. So we'll present that sometime later. All right. So that's, we just pulled a particular document that we wanted to upload here. And then once the file is selected, you can just click on upload, and the upload is completed. So we see upload complete here. Now let's go back and check if this upload is complete. So we come over here. No, not at this one. That's a different. So let's open the orchestrator and storage bucket. We have to look in the storage bucket. So in terms of access and execution, it may look simple, but the process, the interconnectivity, how this is built, if you look at, right, that's very seamless. We hardly did any programming or any code to make it work. So you see, this is the last file that was uploaded, and you can see so let me go back here. If you can, yeah, we can still see the name of the file. So the name of the file that we selected was this, the name of the person .docx. But when this file got uploaded here, since we had that checkbox selected, use auto-generated name. So what it does, it actually keeps the first part, the original file name, and it just appends with a GUID in that file name itself. So that makes it completely unique, since that cannot be repeated. So now you see this content gets uploaded, and without any coding, right? So what does that tell me? That I can actually commit data to my storage bucket if I need to, and if that is the purpose of a business use case I have, with the very least amount of effort. It's not just limited to a file. It can be used for other use cases as well, and I can add certain properties too. I can add additional tags to the information that I'm uploading on the bucket. So I can create additional columns here, and I can have all that information being entered through my UiPath app and uploaded on the storage bucket. So that's first part of it. Now the second part of it, if you will, so just like we have we uploaded this information, we can download this information, we can look at this information, and even uh, rather than going back to the storage bucket itself and trying to download the file from there, we can actually create uh, the file picker control. You can add the file picker control here. So let's do it quickly. I wanted to do that part with all of our attendees here in real time, just to show the features and look at them. So if you drop a file picker control here, you go to the style. I'll keep it very simple. We just expand to the whole page, label placement, go to the left, and you can see this putting these things together is not at all, it doesn't seem like an effort. I mean, it's just primarily part of the UI designing itself, and your backend or your code behind actually is running in parallel. So let's say download file from. All right, so you see there is no difference between these two at this stage, but since we are only going to use this for the download purpose, that's where the download only checkbox comes in picture. So I say download only because now I'm not using this file picker control to upload any content. I'm actually going to use this to download the content, right? So now let's come back here. So how do we get this data over here? Because one another thing would be that at what stage I want this data to be downloaded, right? So that's another topic that we have to look at. So we can do this on the page load, or we can do on this itself. So we can come over here and we can add additional rule that once the data is submitted, we can actually have another rule that actually uploads the file on the file picker control itself, so we can download it, right? So we can build that, and we can go over the download process itself. Now there are additional features that we can build, like deleting content from the storage bucket through the file picker control. One of the restrictions, so now we talked about these features, now I'll talk about briefly about a few restrictions in terms of what file picker control does. Right now, I cannot do multiple files. I cannot upload multiple files. Similarly, I cannot show you multiple files together when I'm trying to show you a view of all the files in the storage bucket. There are alternative ways to do that, but file picker control doesn't serve that purpose for us. Andy, you want to add anything else before we move on to queues?
I think that's pretty fine. I think you have covered it, almost pretty well. One thing that is very good about especially dropping files is you can limit the files with the wildcard extensions. For example, Pradeep has put in there, PDF or docx files. If you try to upload something out of that set guidelines, it's going to reject it. So therefore, you cannot upload any kind of exe or a JavaScript file if you don't want that file to be there.
Right. If I go here, I can pick up something else, and it won't accept it. So
an image file. Yeah.
If I pick up an image file type is not allowed, and those validations are all built-in validations when we define the type.
Anywhere possible, please do pay attention to this. The other thing that you might want to look at is the maximum file size. If you don't want your users to upload, gigabytes of files, you can also limit the file size on your control. If you go into the general part, you can see that I think it's 100 MB maximum file size, but please do look at the documentation. But you can limit users from putting in very large files or files that are prohibited by the guidelines of your organization.
All right. So that covers our storage bucket component. Let's come on to the queues and how do we use queues. So for queues, let's go back here first. So I'm sure some of you have already used queues, and if not, the concept of queues actually came as part of the RE framework itself. So if you remember when RE framework was initially launched, queues was used for the purposes of creating a transaction-based system, because that's what RE framework primarily started with that objective. So you have a way to create transactions so that you can break down a particular operation. So let's say if you're processing hundreds of claims and you're pulling data through an Excel sheet or some other digital format, and you want to process each of those records, each of those items, one at a time. So queues became very handy, right? That queues became the de facto for processing those kind of business operations. And extending that idea, uh, how we can integrate or how we can submit this data to queues through apps became another objective of doing it, because from studio automations we were already doing it. But now if a user if a user who is using apps and they want to submit such request to process a particular business process, how they can do it, how they can create an item in the queue, and so that other background automation can pick it up and run through the processing of it and complete that process. So we'll look at that use case, how queues and apps come together. So for that, um, primarily what happens with UiPath apps, it comes with certain restriction in terms of how you consume queues or how you use the queues. In order for us to be able to use a queue for UiPath apps, we have to create the queue beforehand with a JSON schema. Okay, so what does that mean? So it means that we need to predefine the items, the item type that will be created in the queue. So let's look into this. So I have created this queue apps JSON queue with a target JSON schema. I'll look into that. We'll go into that too. So in terms of creation of queue is pretty straightforward. Whenever you usually come out, if you're doing it through Studio, essentially you don't pay attention to rest of the things. You just come here, create a queue, and you're good to go. And you go back to your Studio automation. You can define which queue you want to publish that information, and the automation publishes that content in the queue. But for apps, we have to predefine the schema itself. So in order for us to be able to consume this queue, we'll take a very standard approach, and I'll show you where you can find some more information on this, actually from the UiPath documentation itself. So UiPath documentation for apps itself talks about it, how you can define it. Okay, so referencing a queue in your app, you can create a sample schema. So this is a sample schema that they provide to use and build a front end and test your connectivity. So what we are going to do, we are going to use something similar to this and for our apps too. So if I go here, this is my JSON file. So in the schema, I have three objects. This is a JSON object schema. So I have name, which is string type. I have age, which is numerical. And I have a department with three items: sales, marketing, and HR. It's a very standard, very simple JSON object. So now let's go back. And so once you save that, then you just need to come over here. You have created your queue. So your queue is ready. So now let's go back and set up the integration with the apps. All right. So here what we are going to do, we are going to create a front end. So now that we know we are accepting 3 properties from every entry, a name, age, and a department. So for that, I created a separate application for this with very simple user interface. So I have a name. Let me expand this also from this side. So you can look at these. These are text boxes. And there's one drop down box, which is for department. And there is update information is a button, which would actually uh, post all of this information in the queue. So in terms of attributes for these, so this is a text object, this is the age, and this is department. So we'll come back and look at the binding of it. But before that, just like we did for the storage buckets, first of all, when we create the UI, the second step is we have to now establish a connection with our queue object. So just like storage object option is here, we have a queue option here. So we open up queues. You can go and you can have your queues, either they can be in your standard workspace or they can be on your shared workspace, right? So you can have in any, you can define where you want to create that object and use it from there. So now the JSON object, the queue that we use, when we click on this, you can see that this is already defined here, right? So the purpose is it's kind of it's building a schema behind the scene, something similar to a table, right? So it already has the name component to it. What would be each column would be called, and also a data type associated with it. So that helps us in terms of even on at the app side, it will help us accept respective data, so we do not violate any of the data integrity principles. All right. So now my queue object is available here. So that's the first stage or first step where my queue is available. The second step is now I have to establish the binding. All right. So we go to name, value binding. If you remember, we did this binding exercise in our first session as well, but it's good that we are doing it again. So that way it's a refresher. So you just click here, and then what we need to do, we need to go find our queues and we need to select name. So that's how you establish a binding here. The rest of the information is not relevant in terms of for the binding purposes. Age, same way, we establish a binding. For department, our binding is also tied to it. The only difference here, because this is a drop down box, we need to provide a list of source, right? So list of source is just the items that will be listed in this drop down box. So for here, I just put a array of string. You can use a variable, you can assign values to a variable. There are other ways as well. You can have a different process altogether behind the scene, where you have dependent drop downs, right? That based on previous controls data, you can filter data in the next drop down. So all those things you can play around with that. But for our use case purposes, I have used a string array over here to provide the data input data that we need. And binding is already set up here. That's a selected value binding to a department. Now we come to update information. So now what we need to do, we need to update this information back to queue. So as always, this is the action where the integration or where the data will be submitted to the queue. So let's look at the rule. So all right, let me do that. So this is my let me move it up. All right. So add to queue. So how do we get this? This is again the event, right? So we can click on plus sign. We can start typing here if we know what we are looking for. So let's say I type queue and I will find add to queue event here. So I can use that. And that's what we have used here, add to queue event. So what are the parameters I have to provide? I have to assign the JSON queue that we are using here. I can define override I can define the success message. I can define error message. So I can say, all right, it's pretty simple. So once we have added that, so that's the first event. The second one is show message, which I have here, which is primarily a pop-up message which will show up. So it's completely on our choice, right? How we want to present that information. You can have altogether different label to show your information in terms of success or failure. You can have a pop-up message box. You can just use the default messaging as part of the add queue itself, where we say, okay, data successfully added to queue, you can use that too. So it's completely use case to use case, and your user interface standards and guidelines that you're following. It should be derived from there, how we present this information to the user. All right, so we close that. I think I have every component here. So let's run this and see how it does. All right. So once we preview it, okay. So our app is launched now. So let's say we enter data here, and let's put Andy's name and department. So you can say HR. And so this is pretty straightforward, right? So in terms of validation, so let's say this is a this is our data validation. So you have inline validation itself, invalid input number expected. So you can work around these things. These are some of the user-based validations on the front end itself. It's not a back-end validation. It's on the control itself, and it goes away as soon as you enter the valid data. So once you have all the data that you would be interested, you can update the information. So you can see this pop-up came at, that was the other prompt that showed this information that data is submitted successfully. So let's go back and look in the queue. Where is my queue? Okay, hold on. I believe I closed it. That's all right. So we can go back to the orchestrator. And we can look at the queue object. And once we come over here, you would not see anything, right? So if you have not used queue before, it's a little confusing what's going on here, right? There's nothing being used. So you can see some of these values like remaining, which are being not processed. So it tells you whether this queue has been in process, whether objects have been processed or not, but it does not show you the objects inside a queue. For that, we have to go all the way to the right. And here you open view transactions. So once we open it, then I will be able to see all the objects in here. So you can see this object is added, and this every object when it gets created, it's always in the new status. The priority and other properties like deadline. Well, deadline is something we can set up when we are creating a queue. Other options like postponed, when it started, when it ended, those are based on the process itself. When the automation triggers and it picks up each individual item, you will have these values available here. So let me look into this detail of the content that we added. So if you see, we added Andy with name Andy, age 28, department HR. So you can see it is still in new, and there are no other further information because these rest of the information is depending on the automation that will pick up this item and process it, right? You can add comments. You can look at the overall history. It was just created a few minutes back as we continue to process this object. So what we saw, we were able to submit this information back to our queue. So now, once we have this information in the queue, the next objective would be to create an automation that can actually, a separate automation, not a UiPath apps automation, right? It will be something like a background process, which will, let's say, will take all of this information that I have submitted. Let's say this information has to go in Workday, right? So it will pick up this information from here, and either it can use integration services or it can use the API, Workday API, and it will be able to publish that information to Workday from there. But from the front end perspective, the end user is only interacting with UiPath apps without any knowledge of what all the processes or steps are happening behind the scene. So that step actually completes our demonstration for uploading this item to the queue. Now, the second topic for the second subtopic from this is reading from the queue or extracting this data so I can see this information from the queue is a topic of a brief discussion. It's not something that I'm going to present it here because it's also a restriction from apps, from queues, from both ends. The reason is once the queue gets completed, it does not send back a completion message, whether it's a successful or a failure response. So it's not just like in a web page, if you're pinging HTTP, right? So you will get a success response or a failure response or a not available response. So queues don't do that. So they pick up item, they complete it, and the transaction will get completed at that stage. But that information is not propagated back to the source of the automation itself, right? So we need to build a separate automation or separate process in there that can go read the queue items, these transaction items, and look at their statuses. And then it can pick all of this information and put them in the data services. So if you remember, we looked at data services last time. Let's go over here. So it can pull all that information and put them in the data services. Once this information is available in the data services, then we can create entities, we can create a similar exact entity like name, age, department, and we can pull all that information here that this particular record is successfully processed, right? So once we have that information, what we can do, we can pick up this information and then we can display it on the UiPath apps if we want to present it back to the user, just like we are presenting, we are accessing information from the user here. So that is the way how we connect the queue data to the data services and from data services to apps. And again, this can change in future releases if UiPath decides to provide a direct integration or direct way of extracting that information from the queue. I think that will make it far more easier. However, that's the alternate route that we can do today. Andy, any comments on that?
Yeah, I think you have covered it all. Next week, when we, work with data service, the whole picture, I guess, will be complete. Because one of the things with queues, as far as UiPath automations are concerned, is as its name suggests, it is a transient thing, right? It's not something that's permanent. So anything added to the queue has to be processed in some shape or form, right? Therefore, it has to end up in a database or a data service or a document somewhere, and then you can build another app, or the same app can have another page that will actually look at that data service or go to that storage bucket to pull that file down, and then you can look at how those queue items were processed. So that's an entire full circle of going from apps to queues to automation back to either a document or a storage bucket or a data service.
Right, and that's how we can present it back to the user. I mean, the other alternate options are, obviously you can always use once the automation is processed, you can directly send out email notifications to your end user, or the administrator, right? So that way you can inform them of any exceptions, uh, or you can just create a UiPath actions, right? So you can always use action items to um, create your notifications. Yeah, there you go. So that you can always use in case of failures, whether it's through queue processing or even through apps processing. You can always come back here and create your action items and put it here. So if you have any open or any pending items, you can always come back here and show uh, what is the status of any issue, and you can even put an assignment as well. If you have not explored this actions, UiPath actions, I would recommend to look into that too, because it's pretty handy feature. I really like it the way, because it builds everything in the one single platform itself, rather than sending individual emails every time you have an exception or you have an issue with that.
Pradeep, we have another 7 minutes to go. There are a couple of questions in the chat
Sure.
stream. I've answered a few of them for those who are actually tracking chat stream, but I want to gather your thoughts on one question by Red is how secure is that storage bucket?
Storage bucket security, there is no separate, I would say, separate security ACL, right? Access control list. So there are no separate security constraints around it. It will be secure as your user security is. So if you go to your admin and you define your users, right, in whatever user group you have created, it will be completely governed by their login privileges or their access and roles. There is no separate parameter to restrict the storage bucket feature itself. So that's what I would respond to.
Yeah, I was thinking along the same lines. And the other thing that you might also want to consider is the data residency guidelines that UiPath has published when it comes to automation cloud. Please do. I have posted a link in the chat stream here. Please do look at it, because your geographic location and the cloud instance, the kind you're using, affects where your data is stored. And I think post May 2021, if I'm correct, there have been some changes on how data is stored. Yeah. So when it comes to security, I think one of the things is it's paramount to understand is where is your data being stored? What is the residence of your data? There is an entire list of the type of users, the type of automation cloud account you have, your geographic zone, and where is your data going to be located.
Yeah, and it does not, it not only it affects your storage bucket, it's those residency guidelines are kind of how long the data is stored. It actually affects assets, queues, and other areas too, which are not actually a full-time storage or anything, but they are still objects out there that reside in the automation cloud. So yeah, like Andy said, please look into that, the guidelines, and follow along.
I have a related question. It says, can we restrict where the data resides? If I am correct, that is an enterprise support function, and you have to talk to UiPath about it.
Yeah.
And if your security guidelines and your business guidelines, kind of are in opposition to where your data is actually residing, then you have to bring it up to UiPath, and they will help you migrate the data into your data residency zone. So yeah, also take a look at that link I just put in there. They can definitely help you out.
Right, and I'll just add to that. If you have customers, or even within your organization, if you are worried about data residency issues, I would suggest look at Automation Suite as well. It's a containerized as well. It's not. It is a containerized solution. So you're not using Automation Cloud. So one that we are showing here, it's completely Automation Cloud, right? There is a parallel ecosystem of automation suite with the same services, with same features, but it's UiPath in a box, right?
Right.
To call it in a simple way.
Yeah.
So I think that is the way a lot of in my experience, a lot of federal government customers are looking into that
Right.
to go with. So if your organization or your customers, if they are financial customers, banking customers, they may have certain restrictions and they may want to keep data within their environment. I think that could be a viable solution for you too in that
Right.
case.
Another question probably you might enjoy answering, Pradeep. Can an app be used to build something like a chatbot?
Can an app be used as a chatbot?
Yeah.
Well, I would say this. UiPath apps is primarily for user capturing user input, but real-time interaction, because chat is a function of real-time interaction,
Yeah.
right? Where you have to build the agent aspect of the system,
Right.
right? Always look into that aspect.
Yeah.
The chat is not, UiPath apps is not configured for that. It's not optimized
Yeah.
for that. You can build something like, let's say if you want to build a self-service agent, right? So where you have some predefined responses prepared, and let's say you store them in the storage bucket or in data service, and you use your UiPath app as a front end to them, you can, but honestly, there are other solutions out there which are much better and much easy to build.
Yeah.
Even UiPath itself recommends Druid platform to build the chatbots.
Right.
So you can go with that. Or you can use any other external vendor products for building your chatbot front end, and UiPath for the backend processes. A lot of organizations do that because UiPath provides a holistic environment where you can span out across various systems, right? Various internal systems, collect relevant data and push it back to the chatbot. So it's a segregation of work. So your front end could be a Druid platform, or it could be for example, you can use Google Dialogflow or Amazon Connect or Microsoft Bot Framework, whatever, right? So that the front chatbot can be some other agent, because you can spin them up very fairly quickly, and you can just pass on all the backend processing to UiPath bots, and it works seamlessly. I
One of
hope
the
that
things,
answers your question.
yeah, I think to add to, as I was thinking as Pradeep was speaking, as far as the chatbot functionality is concerned and that agent functionality is concerned, you might want to explore the interim process result. I'm going to type it out here. It's called interim process result concept of UiPath workflows. It's an activity that you can put into your studio to report intermediate updates back to your app, and your app can grab that and display it on the screen at runtime. You might want to look at this. It is a very few, or what you call very least known concept, but a very cool concept, and you might want to look at that. There is another question. I want to create an app that will remind an employee that they're coming up on their max amount of vacation hours allowed. What is the best way to create this app? Using apps or the form builder or through Studio?
So why do you want to use an app to build it? Because that looks
Yeah,
like more of a notification system, right?
yeah, yeah.
So is that app a front end for the HR team, or it's a front end for the end user? Because it's a notification system, right? So
Right.
it has to be running at least once daily to check, based on employee timesheet, what vacation times they have used and what they actually have available. And once they get within 10% or something, right, you can send them a notification warning them that they are close to using their maximum vacation hours, or
Yeah.
once they surpass it. So it's more, it looks like more of a notification system. So I think Studio Bot is the best way to build it. And then you can use notification. You can use notification. You can use notification on your if every agent already has UiPath Assistant, you can propagate that notification through the assistant, or you can even send emails.
Yeah. There is another question. Can the screens built using apps be accessed by external users that are not part of the organization?
Yes.
So
So
how
screen means the published app, if you're referring to, right?
Yeah, if they have to access that app, let's say they are given access to the public facing app, but when they log in, they are not part of the organization. That would be a tough call, isn't it? Because
so you have to build a page for users who do not need your organizational login, because if it's an external customer and you want to share an app for them to use it, I mean,
yeah,
obviously
we
it
can
stops at
invite them to
the
join the
login. Exactly. Yeah.
automation cloud, right? And
Yeah.
then that's the they have to have an automation cloud account though to access
Right.
it. Otherwise, it's not going to be possible. And then the end user, I think this question by Tony is end user would type in their parameters and the bot would remind them when they hit the threshold. I think Tony has left, but the question about the vacation threshold thing was about, if the end user accesses that app and then puts in the parameters,
Themselves. Okay.
yeah, and then the bot would remind them when they would hit that threshold, right? In terms of how many hours in advance, daily, weekly, or how many pay periods.
So that's a data collection
That's
aspect of it. But that's a one-time collection, right? Well, again, let's say hypothetically that's how we want to build it. So yes, we can build that front end and we can have that data submitted, just like today we saw that, right? We created that information and we were able to post that into a storage bucket. So we can submit that information once it is capped, not storage bucket, sorry, in the queue, and let that information be there. And there will be always be a background automation that will be processing that data. So you can submit this information to a repository using a UiPath app, what the parameters you want.
I mean, it would be an exceptional design, though. It might be possible, but it's an exceptional design which will have everything, all working parts of the UiPath infrastructure to build something like that. All right, I think we are at the top of the hour and then some. We have reached, it's beyond the hour. So if there are no more questions, thank you very much for joining us. And it was really a good session today. A lot of questions and not enough time to answer them, but it was really great. Thank you, Pradeep. Thank you, Diana.
Thank you. Thank you for talking tonight, Pradeep and Andy.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good night.